Welcome to Hive Mind. This is Edge coming back with another video and update on Maxwell with my co-host Speaker. How you doing, Speaker?
I'm good. I'm smashing coffee. It is way too early for me here in the morning, but we're getting it together as much as we can.
Yeah, these hours have got to be killing you.
They are
So,
killing me, but I'm trying to be my lively self and trying to contribute as much as possible these days.
yeah, I mean, we got to be like
Doing my best.
what are we like 18 hours apart? Like it's
18 hours.
tomorrow over there.
Yeah.
So.
So,
All right.
crazy
Well,
times, but I will make this work for all of you.
yeah, and it's important information. I'm glad that we could get another one of these out. Definitely want to keep people up to date on what's going on with the Maxwell trial, and there's a lot to go over. If you missed our last video, check it out. It gives you the first several days of the Maxwell trial, I think 1 through 4, and this is just an update. We're up to day 8 so far on the Maxwell trial, so lots to update on. But so far, we've had 3 victims testify, as well as many other people who corroborate their stories in various different ways and also provide material evidence for the case against Ghislaine. So the first
We
3.
actually, we actually get some photos and all that too from inside, which some of us already have, of course, heavily redacted. Um, but yeah, there's a lot of interesting things going on. So continue, Edge.
Yeah, so we've got 3 victims so far. Jane, which is a pseudonym, that's not her actual name, was the first. And then we had another female going by the name of Kate. And then the last victim to testify has been Carolyn. And they each offer a different sort of story, but obviously all with the same theme of how Ghislaine procured them, groomed them, and actually performed some of the abuse on them. So, and then many other witnesses, whether they were the pilot, uh, Vazosky, Alessi, the house manager who saw and did a lot of things in that house to corroborate and to provide evidence as far as Ghislaine's guilt in this sex trafficking organization, as well as a JP Morgan exec who provided evidence and corroborated evidence on the millions and millions of dollars that Epstein had transferred to get accounts that Ghislaine was in control of, and the FBI agents who were part of the collection of all of the evidence from both the Palm Beach residence as well as the Manhattan home. And we are going to talk a lot about that evidence and some other witnesses as well. There was a boyfriend of one of the victims who could testify as far as the story goes, an expert witness on the grooming process, and a second pilot named Rogers. Rogers has just took the stand here on the
So,
8th day.
anyone that's been following this for a while, like we have, which has been what, 2, 3 years, we've been looking at this sort of stuff before this even come out in light like this. And that this is my opinion, and I know everyone's going to be, well, not everyone, but in this situation, innocent until proven guilty. But with all the information that we have, she was a partner. She was a partner, and I hope that more of this evidence comes out and corroborates it. It's just funny how they try to, play her as a victim as well.
Mm-hmm. 100%. The defense is going to try to play her as a victim, also try to play her as just a girlfriend, sort of like a spouse in a way. And they've then worked really hard to try to discredit the testimonies any way they can of these victims. So, or at least draw in that doubt, break holes in those testimonies so that they create some small amount of doubt in a juror's mind. And so as far as Jane's testimony goes, this is Jane here. And of course, all of the victims have their faces not drawn for the sake of them remaining anonymous, although there is definitely some speculation as to who these women are. And, with a lot of evidence behind it, but we won't go there. So, but Jane's testimony was really compelling. She was 14 when she was abused by Ghislaine and Epstein, and when that started, and it went on for many years. Her testimony has been corroborated in certain parts by both the pilot and the house manager, Alessi, who saw her and witnessed her doing certain things. Her name was in the black book, or that directory that was sitting by the phone, that they had of the list of names of all of the girls, right? So a lot of corroborating evidence on her testimony. There was an issue, however, that came up this week with Jane, and apparently she had had a conversation with her brother. And in this conversation, she talked about, bits and pieces of her testimony about going to the Interlochen school. And she even referred to one of the defense attorneys as an expletive that rhymes with blunt. So, but this came out this week, and the defense was basically trying to say, look, this is a problem for us because I guess the brother, who's going by, I think, Brian, and I don't know if that's a fake name as well, but Brian may have been a witness that they were going to try to call to corroborate Jane's testimony. And now the defense is saying, look, you can't do that because, these two, we now are aware, were having a conversation. And, if he comes and testifies, then it looks like, well, that they were collaborating on the testimony. So it's to be seen whether or not Jane's brother is actually going to come up on the stand at some point, but I thought it was worth noting. Not that I don't believe Jane's story, and not that I don't think it's, I don't think it's a big deal that she was talking to her brother Brian, but as far as when you're talking about court cases and testimonies and witnesses, and there's certain rules that have to be followed, and when they're not, that's just puts the ball in the court of the defense to be able to claim, look, this isn't fair, right? Mm. So, but Kate's testimony was also very compelling. Her story, it just kind of started off with her meeting Ghislaine in Paris and being kind of marked by Ghislaine. Like Ghislaine kind of found her, right? And so it really does create that testimony of how Ghislaine was the procurer, how she was the one, the headhunter, so to speak, of these girls, right? And so she, invited Kate over to her townhome in London, and Kate really just looked up to Ghislaine and aspired to be like her. And Ghislaine slowly started, grooming her. It started off with just like a shoulder massage with Epstein, and moved very quickly into very sexual stuff, right? And so, and her story was very solid and corroborated. The only issue here with Kate as a witness or a victim is that she's a bit older. I think she was 17 when all this started, and it really can't be considered, I guess, as far as this trial goes, as far as these charges goes on sex trafficking minors. She can't really be considered under that. But her testimony has been used, as far as the prosecution goes, to really lay out how Ghislaine would procure these girls and how she would groom these girls. Because remember, they had an expert testimony by I believe was a psychologist, who was explaining the multiple steps that groomers use for pedophilia and things like that. And so as Kate's laying out her story, you're seeing one incident after the other, the various steps as far as the grooming process goes that were used on her. And so it's really just establishing more of how Ghislaine operated and how she was very much involved in this sex trafficking ring, as opposed to just an innocent bystander. So her testimony alone to convict wouldn't be, nearly as compelling as, just as supplemental to these other girls who are testifying, although I'm not minimizing her suffering in any way, just simply based off of the charges for child
It
sex
it
trafficking.
it it does build the case though. It does
Yes,
help strengthen the case and the process.
exactly. Exactly. And so then Carolyn's testimony came up this week, and Carolyn's story is just a very emotional one. It's a very sad story. It's very compelling. She talked about how her mother was an alcoholic, how her grandfather raped and molested her starting at the age of 4 years old. So this girl was very, very much abused all her life, right? And without much parental guidance. And so you wonder, like, how do these girls get involved in such things, right? And
Mm.
it's, when you see a girl like Carolyn, you understand how they're really looking for those girls who are vulnerable, to be able to fall into this trap.
And they're
But
also looking for, parents, I guess, guardians, people to help them, people to look up to. And, anyone that shows them a little bit of a kindness
mhm.
and they attach to that and they attack that, they use that and they use that to law.
Right, right. And it became sort of like a pyramid scheme. Carolyn describes that she met Virginia Roberts Jeffrey, who you'll recall is one of the known victims, one of the more prominent faces of the victims of this whole sex trafficking scheme. Obviously, the famous picture of Virginia Roberts Jeffrey with, Prince Andrew and Ghislaine standing right there. So Carolyn had met Virginia Roberts Jeffrey at a party, and Virginia recruited her. She was 14 when she first went over to Epstein's house and started doing the massages, which obviously became sexual. And she talked about how Ghislaine herself groped her, but she also talked about the money. She was paid $300 every time. And she was, again, the pyramid scheme. She was told to recruit other girls, which she did. She brought 3 other girls over, and she was paid extra money on top of that, for recruiting the other girls. So, and you ask, she went back, more than 100 times, or at least 100 times. So, and this was over the course of at least 4 years, like from 14 to 18. Finally, they said, oh, you're 18 now, you're too old, type of thing. And so she couldn't, go back over there because they only wanted the young girls, and they wanted them younger and younger. Like, I think she was told, do you have anyone? They were constantly asking, do you have anyone younger to bring over? um so, like, very sick stuff. But and of course you get a lot of more details about the sexual stuff, which I don't have to get into. You can read the transcripts and everything for all of those gory details, but you guys know what he was into. And so she talked about, she had an addiction, a big addiction, and how she spent all that money on cocaine. And she had some run-ins with the law. Obviously, when you're an addict who's been abused and you've got some mental and emotional issues and stuff. So she had a couple run-ins with the law over drugs and stolen property and stuff. But she was able to give very detailed descriptions, say, of like the house and of the bathroom and everything where the abuse took place. So, details that you would assume someone who's actually been there knew. And that did kind of bolster her testimony. But, I find her testimony to be very believable, very emotional. And that's definitely working for her. But the problem with her is that, from what I understand, she has not been consistent with previous statements that she's given to the police and in other court cases. And not only that, there seems to be a limitation as far as and I'm trying to be like nice about this, not being critical in any way, but she has a 7th grade education. Okay, like that was when she stopped going to school. And there clearly seems to be some some mental issues there. And so
I mean, how
with
could there not be?
right. So all the dates and things that happened and her age at the times that things happened, and even details of sexual activity, they've changed each time she's given statements. And the defense spent a lot of time this week going through all of those inconsistencies and her history of drug abuse, of run-ins with the law, all of that to establish this reasonable doubt in the minds of the jury. For example, in prior litigation, Carolyn had said that there was no sex during the massages with Epstein. And this time around, she's testifying that he did, in fact, rape her, that she wasn't willing. So, some of these details are definitely being highlighted by the defense to discredit her testimony. And another thing to mention is she's also on several medications, including medications for schizophrenia. So let me just say for the record, from what I've seen so far, and I've watched videos from people who were, in the media room viewing the inside the courtroom, and read a lot of the transcripts myself. From my perspective, I find these victims to be very believable. I find their stories to be very compelling and corroborated. But I can see how the defense could place reasonable doubt in the minds of the jurors for each one of them. And so that worries me a little bit. And it's just really hard to know how the jury is gauging it, because we can't see for ourselves. I mean, Jane had some small inconsistencies with her story, nothing major. But then there's also that conversation that she had with her brother, right? That, it's just, there's that little issue. And then Kate's testimony was solid, but again, it's not enough on its own to convict for sex trafficking young underage girls due to the age that Kate was when her abuse began. And then with, for obvious reasons with Carolyn's story, the abuse when she was starting when she was 4, having mental issues, a history of drug abuse, criminal activity, and then lots of little inconsistencies on the details of her stories. So, is it enough to convince the jury that there is at least some doubt that their stories are true? I don't know. It's just very hard to gauge when we can't see inside the courtroom. But I'm guessing that there's really this emotional element to the way these jurors are sympathizing with these victims,
Hmm.
and we can't really see that without having, some sort of, look into the courtroom itself. We have to just go off of other people's perspective on it. But it's not just their testimonies, it's also tons and tons of evidence that's been admitted. There's supporting evidence, by the house manager, Alessi's testimony, which was pretty damning in itself. I mean, everything that Alessi was saying, as far as how Ghislaine treated everybody and how Ghislaine was the boss, it really does bolster this whole case. Plus all the evidence that the FBI has admitted, really pretty damning. So, Alessi's testimony, it really helped to illustrate like how much of a vile woman Ghislaine was. He picked up girls. Alessi himself, he picked up girls, dropped them off. He called girls and set appointments. He drove Ghislaine around, scoping out places to recruit more girls. He set up the massage tables, the oils. He cleaned up afterwards. I mean, he witnessed girls at the pool that looked underage, that were topless all the time. So, he definitely had a lot to say, and it was all pretty damning. He said there were hundreds and hundreds of names in the little black book. and of girls to call. And this was all at the direction of Ghislaine. Like she was his boss and she micromanaged him on all of these things.
Oh, she was the secretary of this trafficking ring.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
She's the bookkeeper.
Yeah. And so, we had some pictures admitted into evidence. The FBI, they've a couple of agents have testified in this case this week. And as far as the evidence that was collected at the Palm Beach home, but also at the Manhattan home being more recent, and in my opinion, having more clear evidence. But so the FBI's evidence we have from that, we have pictures that were admitted, and none of these pictures are really anything major that they're not showing us anything as far as obviously not pictures of the young girls, right? Because that we can't as the public see that. But
there's a lot redacted, like
a lot redacted. Yes. And even but of high profile pictures of people that he was involved with. There's a lot redacted. You can assume that in this house, like for example, here is a picture of the house, then a picture over here redacted, whether that's a naked girl or whether or not that's a high profile figure, whatever the case is, they're redacting a lot of stuff. And but you get a kind of a feel for the home. God, how gaudy this place is. I mean, everything I see, it's just like this. It's just so tacky. Just side note, but the more important, obvious pieces of evidence are the pictures. Now, we haven't seen anything from these hard drives or from these CDs, but it's showing you the pictures that the FBI took when they raided the Manhattan home, and there were boxes full of hard drives with thousands and thousands and thousands of pictures of girls. And when the police did this raid back in 2019, and they were the court documents for Epstein's case before he died, the court documents said that talked about these hard drives and CDs. This is the safe that they raided. CDs with girls' names on them. They talked about them as being written and having the names of girls on them. And some of them would have the girl's name, like young Selena, for example, young girl plus another name. And when we got that kind of nugget of information from the court documents from Epstein's case, it really was like one of those aha pieces of information about how these high profile people had been compromised. And when I see this CD here, for example, it says Selena AV shoot. Now, when you see AV, what is that? Audio visual, right? But what are they referring to there? Is that like I would assume, this is just my conjecture. I would assume this means like the cameras that Epstein had in his house running all the time, right? And what are these, like videos and stills of this girl, from the security footage, right? That's what I'm guessing.
Well, there's different ways that you can go about this. So like we knew it was a trafficking ring. We know he's making money off this as well. And we know he's also selling these women in some sort of ways. So on that tape could be like it's like a Tinder profile, right? Except with videos and pictures and would do you want more? Here, buy the pre-tape, the demo, and then it could be anything like that.
Right. Yeah. But I'm thinking name plus name. That's what it was written on some of these CDs. And remember, look, we're talking about he had black books. Each of these books, well, look, it's been redacted because obviously it's going to have like names on it or something. But these are books filled with these CDs with pictures. And when that wasn't enough, then we had whole freaking hard drives, boxes of hard drives of this stuff, right? But to me, when you see name plus name written on it, it sounds to me like these were videos taken of a girl plus whoever the John was. And mostly, we know who Epstein hung out with, right? So the high profile people that they were looking to compromise. It looks like definite blackmail material could be most definitely is part of this. So, but we, of course, we're not privy to this information. We don't get to see, not that I want to see, but I just want the exposure of whoever is compromised to come out. I want it to come out. Who has been compromised, right?
Oh, of course.
Right. So another thing though, as far as the flight logs, they have been talking about flight logs. They've shown flight logs and admitted flight logs as part of evidence, but not the full flight logs. No. And definitely, it's a lot of redacted stuff, but definitely can glean a lot of information from the flight logs that we, as the public currently can get online. And obviously, Bill Clinton being one of those high profile figures who just shows up time and time again on these flight logs. But we found out this week, and there's many, many, many names on the Epstein flight logs, as well as the little black book. But this week it came out that, that Epstein visited Clinton's White House 17 times between 93 and 95.
Yeah,
so
that's
new information right there. I mean, we knew about all the 27-ish flights that Bill has had on Epstein's plane. They're going to Africa. We even have pictures of Bill on the plane, pictures of Bill getting massages from one of the girls, so all pretty damning stuff. But this is new information as far as Epstein actually going to the White House 17 times. That's pretty significant. I mean, there's major figureheads that didn't go to the White House during the Clinton administration 17 times. I mean, Epstein was up there on the number of times. So that's significant. And you have to ask why. Of course, we know Bill Clinton was into all this stuff, but, going to the White House, that's an entirely different thing. I mean, it seems to me like it would be more on official business. And what kind of business were Epstein and Ghislaine in? Well, they were in the intelligence gathering business. They were in the compromise business. They were in the blackmail business, I would assume, right? I mean, that's really the business that they were in. So here we have, and here's one other thing I wanted to mention this, I forgot. Carolyn, the third victim, she let out an interesting tidbit, or actually I think one of the attorneys brought it up, but she confirmed it. An interesting tidbit I'd never heard before. This is new information, that there was a photo of that at one of Epstein's home. Epstein had a photo of Ghislaine Maxwell naked and pregnant in his mansion. That's new information, and the reason being is that Ghislaine is not known to ever have had children, and so there's no further details on that, whether this child was Epstein's or not. But considering how close they were, I mean, that's what this whole trial is about. That's all they keep talking about. It's how freaking close. And they keep showing these pictures of, like, if you had seen these pictures, it just looks like they were, it just looks like they were this loving couple. It's so gross. But that's kind of how it's being painted, right? Like that they were a couple. And so, of course, you have to assume that if she was pregnant, what are the chances that it was Epstein's? I say pretty high, especially. And the first thing that came to my mind is that creepy story that came out when Epstein had been arrested. of how Zorro Ranch was used as this weird transhumanist baby ranch. He wanted to impregnate all these girls and like spread his seed and ugh, right? But it was so much more than that. I mean, I think that Epstein was really into, as many of these elites are, into eugenics, into transhumanism, into living forever, into modifying the human, genome and all this crap we're seeing play out right now on the world stage. Epstein was really at the forefront of that and like living it out through this
Mhm.
sick, weird thing that he was doing at Zorro Ranch.
Well, they have weird ideas that whether they're real or not in any aspect is who knows, who cares. But like uh, the things that they think makes them live forever, right? And then that way we dive more into the satanic sort of side of things, and definitely young girls and the tainting of young girls is some sort of drug for them as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And so you have to wonder what happened, how many of these girls actually got pregnant, um, how, what actually happened to the babies. I mean, it gets really, really dark, especially when you start thinking about all the things that happened on Epstein Island and the things that really have never fully come out, right? Like what happened at that temple, right? And we all go to that really, really dark place. But as far as I know, this is new information as far as Ghislaine being pregnant at some point, and whatever happened to that baby, I don't know. Interesting. They just kind of let that one hang. Like, okay, you saw a picture of her naked and pregnant. All right, thanks. Moving on. Like, there was no follow up on that. Like, what? What the?
Yeah, let's just skip over it.
Right, right.
Not important.
Okay. More information, please. So yeah, a lot of little tidbits like that. But I wanted to show you kind of what's been happening outside the court as well, because at one Addy Ads, he goes by Addy, he's been outside of the court filming a lot of these people, high profile people coming and going, whether it's the attorneys themselves or this is Isabel Maxwell, Ghislaine's sister, who's been attending the trial. And they have been actually very vocal. The family has been very vocal about Ghislaine's treatment. Oh, she's such a victim,
I know,
in
right?
prison. But what I love about Addy is he's actually asking the questions I care about. And this one right here, he's asking Ghislaine, I'm sorry, asking Isabel Maxwell about her and her family's and Ghislaine's ties to the Mossad. And, so that's the kind of relevant stuff I would love to hear more about. But obviously, the sister dodges that question. At least it's something that is getting uh, some eyes on it, some awareness on it in the public, because this trial, in my opinion, is as much about the trial of public opinion as it is about the actual trial itself and the justice system itself. Because we know a lot of these questions are not going to be asked in the courtroom, right?
Oh, absolutely not.
And here he is again. He catches Isabel and Kevin Maxwell entering the courthouse. And again, he asks Isabel about Calm Touch and Siren software and if it has a back door for Israeli intelligence to spy on Americans, and also how the Bill Gates's connection to Isabel's software company that was called Magellan through Microsoft. And so I'll give a little bit of kind of background on that because I think it's important. Like this is the crux of all of it, right? Is how this information, this blackmail material was used, right? To compromise people. And so um, that, let me see here. So Ghislaine has this connection to the intel communities. So here we have, the whole sex trafficking ring through Epstein and Ghislaine. But then we have, through other family members, this connection to Mossad and other intel communities, the CIA, MI5. So her father had ties to Mossad, MI5, and the CIA. And let's see if I can find. Yeah. So through Promise, he has a connection to Promise, the data collection software. And this data collection software Promise, we know it was used, it was bugged with backdoors, it was distributed to countries, allies, and enemies with access to the backdoors for the US and Israeli intelligence to use. And then after Robert, and this was like in order to be able to spy and collect data, right? And so after Robert Maxwell died, his daughters really took over this whole software business because the daughters, Isabel and Christine, were actually working alongside Robert Maxwell through this whole data collection, intelligence collection business that they were doing for intelligence communities. And Isabel and Christine really picked up where Robert Maxwell left off. Under different companies, but essentially doing the same thing through these companies, Magellan, ComTouch, Siren. They've been used by AT&T, Time Warner, IBM, Netcom, Microsoft. I mean, presumably with the same sort of backdoors built in for the intelligence communities to spy. And obviously that Microsoft connection, that's the connection to Bill Gates. And we've all seen the pictures of Bill Gates with Epstein. We've heard the stories of Bill Gates meeting with Epstein many times, and so now we have this. You're starting to see the puzzle pieces coming together, not just the sex trafficking, right? But you have to look at the bigger picture here. This is like a family very well connected to the elites and very well connected to intelligence communities. And they're dealing on various fronts, whether it's the sex trafficking blackmail side of it, or it's the data collection spying side of it. And now we're involving Silicon Valley too. Right. So it's this massive network here of control, compromise of the most powerful people in the world. And the sisters obviously are very heavily involved. But, when you have a way for the intel communities to spy on and compromise and control practically every politician, every figurehead, Hollywood star, Silicon Valley oligarch, doctor, scientist, you name it, then you can control the way the future goes, right? You can control how these people conduct their area of expertise.
Well, you can control the future of civilization.
Exactly. That's how powerful this information dealing business is. And you can't deny that these people are in some way connected to it. And so there's no doubt that the corruption that we're seeing in politicians around the world who are imposing totalitarian measures is due in major part, in my opinion, to this blackmail ring and blackmail by the intel communities. This one world government, the Great Reset, I mean, it's being pushed, I think, in large part by blackmail by the intel communities, no doubt. And Ghislaine's sisters are connected. There's connections that Ghislaine's sister has to the UN, to the World Economic Forum. So it's not just a trial about Ghislaine and procuring girls for Epstein's weird, disgusting sexual massages with underage girls. It's so much more than that. And this trial is definitely, I think, going to show us the the state of our justice system. However it pans out, we'll see how the justice system is holding up these days. But and
I
I
mean,
think
it was kind of set up to fail to begin with, but let's see, let's hope.
let's hope. I mean, I
Mm,
want to see justice for these victims. I
of
want
course.
Ghislaine to be put away forever. But this is about so much more than that. The scope of this trial is so narrow compared to the full scope of what this entire operation is about. And I think it's our job to, while this trial is going, while there are eyes on it and there is a hunger by the public to get information, it's up to us to shine a spotlight on the bigger picture, the scope of this entire child sex trafficking, blackmail, intelligence operation, and just making the public aware that, look, these sick elites who are trying to control us under the guise of health and safety are very likely controlled themselves through blackmail.
Mm, 100%.
And we got to stop listening to them and become ungovernable and continue to press for the full truth to come out and for the full justice to come out, because it's never going to stop unless we don't first recognize how deep this goes. And it goes really, really deep.
And with things like that, there's always someone lined up to take your place.
Yeah. As for where this trial is going, the prosecution dropped a bomb this week. They said they're planning on resting their case this week. This week, they're planning on resting their case. I mean, it was said to be like a 5 or 6 week trial. So this is a big change. I mean, why is the prosecution resting? So I don't know, do they feel confident enough that the testimony and the evidence they've presented is solid enough beyond a reasonable doubt? I don't know, but that's surprising to me and to many others that they're resting this week. And again, you have to call into question the prosecutor Comey's allegiances to her father and the intelligence community as it pertains to this case, do you not?
Mm.
So we'll just have to see. But as I've stated, and I'll just repeat, I find the victims' testimonies to be very compelling and truthful and emotional, and I sympathize with them and I want justice for them. And I find the evidence, as redacted as it is, to still be very compelling enough to convict Ghislaine. I do question the prosecution's decision to rest. I do question why the prosecution chose these 3 particular victims as opposed to, say, other victims, whether or not they were limited on the number of girls or the type of girls that were willing to come forward. I don't have information on that. But I can see how the defense is able to create or cast some shadow of a doubt on each of these girls for various reasons. And that worries me a little bit as far as how solid the prosecution's case is. So we're just going to have to see. But I definitely feel like, from my perspective, that they've presented compelling information. And I personally would convict Ghislaine, but I'm not a juror. So
Yeah, we're just gonna have to say, aren't we?
Yeah.
Let's
Yeah.
hope.
Yes. I wanted to let people know, and I did mention this, but I'll just reiterate. So a couple of Twitter feeds that I follow to get some information. One, Addy Ads, he's there. He's sometimes he is inside watching in the media room so he can report what he has firsthand seen going on in the court. And sometimes he's outside taking footage of people going inside the court, asking him questions. So that's a good account to follow, as well as inner city press. He's also in the media room, viewing room, taking down the actual statements being said, you know, shorthand version, but the testimony being said, questions being asked in a sort of a real-time basis to get that information. But then some other really good accounts to follow, a couple on YouTube. Good Logic, he is also there inside the media room, and he's been reporting daily, several times a day, on what he's seen. He's an attorney, so he can give like a sort of legal perspective as well, and he's really grounded and has good perspectives. So
I mean, it's good that we're having a different sort of people covering this. Really not enough, but there is some.
there's not enough, and that's why that's actually why he did this. He was part of the guys that from I think it's like Riker or Reichert Law. I can't remember, but they provided really excellent coverage of the Rittenhouse trial. And he was one of those attorneys that was part of that. And he just always had some really good takes on things. So, I've been watching him on this Ghislaine Maxwell trial, and he's given some good information. And he noticed how there's such a lacking on reporting on this. And, from people who have actually been there, not just reading the transcripts, because there's a huge difference in the little nuances of the tone and connotation and, that kind of a thing that just does not read well when you're reading just transcripts. So, and then this guy as well, Robert Gruler, has been giving some great legal perspective on and a great detail on the daily happenings with this trial. So those are some good accounts to follow if you guys want to get some more information. But I just thought I'd give an overall recap. And really, I want to, anytime I'm doing these, talk about the big elephant in the room that people just aren't not talking about with this trial. And that's because the scope of the trial really doesn't cover it. And that is that major connection of the intel community, this material, all these CDs, hard drives, and everything. How much of that was used for blackmail material to compromise the people who are in powerful positions, who are controlling our societies right now, and how that affects us on our daily lives, right? So anything else you want to say before we wrap up?
No, I'm just interested to see how this is going to turn out, because it's something that we all really wanted the full truth to, and that have been fighting for the full truth for years, even after Epstein's death, which was a huge blow. We all wanted him to face trial. We all wanted him to get what he deserves. And there was lots of us that had eyes on that island and that had eyes on those sort of things. And look, it doesn't look like we're going to get that full scope, but at least we can get some justification for these victims in some way.
Yeah, so we've got some more time, the prosecution wrapping up soon, and then the defense presenting some of their witnesses and so forth. So we may or may not give another update on this case, depending on how interested you guys are in on these. But yeah, I'm definitely going to be following this and keeping track.
It's doing an amazing job putting all this together and keeping up with all this. So I thank you for that too.
It's important. It's important. It has so many implications, even in all of our lives, because we're all affected by these totalitarian regimes, that were democracies, but are turning very quickly into totalitarian regimes and how they're controlling us. And then you have to ask how many of these people are controlled themselves. And we have got to get to the bottom of that. And I think this Ghislaine Maxwell trial is part of that, exposing that. So I'm happy to do it, and I think it's an important thing to talk about. So, all right, guys, thanks, guys, for joining us today on HiveMind. Please be sure to share this podcast. We're on YouTube, BitChute, Pilled, and Foxhole, and we'll see you back next time right here on HiveMind.